Today on the Matt Walsh Show, it sounds like a Babylon Bee headline, but it's true. Woke criminal justice reform has gotten to the point where now an axe murderer Cannibal is being released back into society. But don't worry, he promises he won't butcher and consume anyone else. Also, Ilhan Omar comes right out and says exactly how she feels about Americans. We are stupid and shouldn't be allowed to say, quote, ridiculous things. Those are her words exactly. A trans actor is shocked to find out that his passport correctly lists his sex. And tragedy strikes the nation as Joy Reid is fired from her MSNBC show. I am truly mourning the loss. I'll explain why. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. As we celebrate the victory of our 47th president, there's no better way than to introduce the 4547 Patriot Edition American whiskey produced by the team at Wise Spirits right here in our hometown of Nashville. Their masterfully handcrafted American whiskey pays homage to the very essence of our great nation and celebrating its rich history and vibrant culture. Each batch is carefully selected from the finest barrels, with each drop representing a testament to precision and quality. The best part is this whiskey is made by patriots for patriots and embodying the spirit of the American dream. I've had the pleasure of enjoying 4547 whiskey, and let me tell you, I got a bottle of it at my house, and it hits hard with a strong taste, a clean finish. And you can tell this isn't some cheap bottom shelf stuff. It's the kind of drink that makes you want to lean back in your chair and have another. Experience this for yourself. Experience the 4547 Patriot Edition whiskey, where every sip tells a powerful story of heritage, craftsmanship, and indomitable spirit. Here's to freedom, to tradition, and to the spirit of America. 4547 Patriot Edition American whiskey, crafted with honor, inspired by courage, crafted by Wise Spirits, Nashville, Tennessee. Please drink responsibly. 4547 Premium American Whiskey, 46% alcohol per volume. Copyright 2025, Wise Spirits Incorporated, Nashville, Tennessee. Must be 21 or over. We've talked a good deal about the damage that the field of modern psychiatry has done to mankind across a variety of contexts. Most of the harms, the invention of gender ideology, the mass overprescribing of psychotropic drugs, and so on, are relatively widely known. What's less well known, because not a lot of people talk about it, is the sinister influence of modern psychiatry on our criminal justice system. For all the criticism to be made of Soros DAs and Democrats' refusal to prosecute criminals, all of it justified, the role of modern psychiatry in freeing violent offenders is often ignored. But it's very much a crisis in this country, and it's been one for a long time. It was all the way back in the early 1970s when a man named Charles Meach beat a 22-year-old grocery store clerk to death in Anchorage, Alaska. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and shipped off to a mental institution. But just 7 years later, Meach was released, and psychiatrists claimed that Meach had made a full recovery. He promised he wouldn't murder anyone in the future, and that was good enough, apparently. After all, why would he lie? I mean, what had Charles Meach ever done to prove himself untrustworthy? I mean, aside from the whole beating someone to death thing, but aside from that, why wouldn't you trust him? So he was released on the honor system. He pinky promised not to murder ever again. But shockingly, the promise was short-lived. 2 years later, Meach purchased a revolver and murdered 4 teenagers at a campsite just for the thrill of it. Now, reforms were promised after that massacre, and you can see why. It was a pretty clear sign that mental health professionals should stop pretending that murderers can somehow be cured of their murderous tendencies, because murder is not, in fact, a symptom of an illness. It is a manifestation of human evil. And people who commit those kinds of evil acts should be locked in prison forever. But psychiatrists were not dissuaded. Instead, our sainted mental health professionals, with the help of mostly Democrat-controlled state governments across the country, have continued to embed themselves into the criminal justice system. Their psychiatric facilities now function as safe houses for violent thugs like Jordan Neely, for instance, who did not go to prison even after he assaulted an elderly woman, punched her in the face on the subway, broke her nose. Instead, Neely was offered intensive outpatient psychiatric treatment, quote unquote, which would supposedly cure him of his addiction to terrorizing random people on the train, and, well, we all know how that turned out. Any rational person who looks at incidents like this will recognize immediately what's going on. Left-wing prosecutors have found a kind of hack, an end run that enables them to release extremely dangerous criminals, even when their guilt is beyond any doubt. All the prosecutors have to do is find some hippie psychiatrists to sign off on a treatment plan, and then pretty much anything is possible. They could release some of the most dangerous and depraved criminals on the planet who committed their crimes not too long ago based solely on the pseudoscience of modern psychiatry, which is completely subjective and often relies entirely on the promise of the criminal not to reoffend. There is no crime, and I really mean no crime, so heinous that the criminal cannot be released back into society if a psychiatrist claims that he's been successfully treated. And if you think I'm exaggerating, then please consider the case of Tyree Smith, which has to be one of the most outrageous miscarriages of justice we have ever seen in American history. And Tyree Smith confessed to the brutal murder of a 43-year-old homeless man in a vacant apartment in Connecticut back in 2011. And Smith was apparently distressed about losing his job at Starbucks or something before he began hearing voices in his head. And the details of his crime are so horrific that I'm sorry I have to share them with you, but it's important that you have the full story, so here it is. Smith used an axe to kill this man inside an abandoned home in Bridgeport. He then hacked up the man's body, removed several of his organs, an eyeball and some of his brain, and then ate them at a cemetery nearby. Okay, so this is an actual axe-murdering graveyard cannibal we're talking about. Something straight out of a horror film. And the man's body, or what was left of it anyway, wasn't found for nearly 40 days. At trial, Smith was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And in 2013, a panel of judges committed Smith to a mental institution for 60 years. But Smith will not spend anywhere near 60 years in a mental institution. Instead, something called the Psychiatric Security Review Board in Connecticut has just granted Smith, the axe-murdering cannibal, a conditional release. And that means he'll receive day passes to wander around on the hospital grounds as he pleases. And very soon he'll be able to make off-site visits into the community. Watch.
A man accused of killing and eating another person in Bridgeport being granted a conditional release. Tyree Smith killed Angel Gonzalez with an axe in 2011 and ate part of the victim's body. Smith was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sentenced to 60 years in a psychiatric hospital.
Now, if you had told me a few years ago that woke justice reform would soon lead to the release of an axe murderer cannibal, it would have seemed too outlandish even to me. Even if you have a black murderer and a white victim, as you do in this case, even given everything we've seen during the moral panic of the BLM era, it still seems unthinkable. And it only gets more unthinkable when you look into the specifics of Tyree Smith's case and why he was released. So it's already as bad as you could possibly think it could ever be. But when you look into the details, it gets worse somehow. Now, first of all, it's perhaps worth noting that this decision was made during a hearing in which Tyree Smith wasn't even present. He teleconferenced in, and he didn't appear on the video screens in the hearing room. So right away, you know, it may seem like a minor detail, but that should already be disqualifying. I mean, you won't find very many employers in this country that are willing to hire a job applicant after a phone call without seeing the person in any way, which means it is, at least in some ways apparently, more difficult for a normal person to get a job at Walmart than it is for a homicidal cannibal to get released from an asylum. So why is Connecticut releasing Tyree Smith? Well, as the hearing went on, a psychiatrist testified that Smith has recovered. He's a reformed cannibal. His axe-murdering days are behind him. And her evidence for this statement is that Smith has denied experiencing any hallucinations or having any desire to harm other people. He's better now. And we know that he's better now because he says he's better now. I'm going to play that clip from the hearing, and then at the end you'll see a question from the prosecutor to the doctor, an important question, but watch.
He has maintained clinical stability, adhered to prescribed medications, and continued to engage meaningfully in groups and substance use treatment. He also denied visual hallucinations or a desire to harm others or himself.
It's safe to say that if he doesn't take his medication, that his auditory hallucinations that tell him to kill people, kill police officers may come back.
Yes.
Well, as you just heard, evidence of Tyree Smith's recovery is based entirely on self-reported data. So they know that he hasn't had any hallucinations or cravings to consume human flesh because he told them. Quote, he denied visual hallucinations or a desire to harm others or himself. Oh, he denied it. Well, okay then. I mean, what more do you need to know? Oh, and by the way, if he stops taking his medication, he could totally become a cannibal again. So let's just hope he doesn't skip a few days. He doesn't forget to take the pill. But as long as that doesn't happen, he probably won't murder and eat anybody else. He's pinky promised. He pinky promises that he'll keep taking the medication and he won't murder anybody. And that's it. Now, of course, at the same time, Smith also knows that his only chance of ever seeing the outside world again is to lie about all of this. So either he is an axe murderer cannibal who grew out of it, like a child grows out of a bedwetting phase or something, or he's lying. And there is about, I would say, a 99.9999999% chance of the latter. Now, at the hearing, one of the victim's family members pointed this out. She remarked, quote, how do we really know he's not going to do this again? He had no remorse for killing Angel. She also said that the whole family is terrified because it's quite possible Tyree Smith will reoffend. Watch.
Doctors say Smith has been a joy and a support to other patients. But despite that, Talitha Frazier, Gonzalez's sister-in-law and spokesperson for the family, says they constantly live in fear.
His grandchildren are scared. His daughter is so scared she couldn't even make it this morning. Her sugar dropped to 52.
So the axe murderer cannibal is apparently the life of the party at the insane asylum. You know, he's just a joy to be around. Of course, we can probably assume that the man he hacked to death and then consumed would disagree with that assessment. Probably wasn't much of a joy on that particular day, but he's not here because he's dead. And the point is that as long as Tyree Smith isn't axe murdering, he's really quite pleasant. But that is small comfort to the family of his victim, who really wants an answer to a pretty basic question, which is what assurances do we have that he won't kill us exactly? Now, in their report, the Connecticut Psychiatry Board includes this line, which is really an all-time caliber line. I mean, if you're assembling a hall of fame of the most deranged statements that the medical profession has tried to pass off as legitimate, this would have to be very high on the list. And this is directly from the Connecticut Psychiatry Board's report. I am not making this up, I assure you. Here's what it says. Quote, he denied experiencing cravings, but stated that if they were to arise, he would reach out to his hospital and community supports and providers. Close quote. Yes, cravings. So just relax, everybody. There's nothing to worry about. The Connecticut Psychiatric Board is releasing an axe murderer cannibal back into society, but they assure us that if he experiences any cravings for the taste of human flesh, he will immediately reach out for help. So they're going to release him, but they'll say on the way out the door, hey, make sure to reach out if you ever feel like eating someone's brain, okay? And that should do it. I mean, what a relief. In the last decade or so that he's been locked away, Tyree Smith has become totally and completely normal. There is zero likelihood that Tyree Smith will, say, order Uber Eats and assume that the delivery driver is the meal. I mean, that's not going to happen because, or at least if that did happen, he would reach out. He's going to just reaching out to let you know I want to eat somebody, I guess is what the email will say when he sends it. Of course, all of this discussion about whether Tyree Smith is reformed actually misses the point anyway. Even in the fantasy land scenario where an axe murderer could be transformed into a functional tax-paying member of society, he still should not be released. He should be in prison as a matter of basic justice. You killed a guy and ate him. So on top of segregating this maniac from society, he also needs to be punished for doing a very bad thing. If he's truly cured of his schizophrenia and murderous tendencies, then fine, great, then ship him directly to a maximum security prison where he should live out the rest of his days. And the idea that he belongs in civilized society after brutally murdering a man and then eating him is only appealing if you're the kind of person who, for one reason or another, sympathizes more with killers than the victims who are killed. And that is the kind of attitude that defines a lot of psychiatrists. For example, I looked up one of the Yale psychiatrists who testified for the defense in Smith's original trial. Her name is Reena Kapoor, pronouns she, her, hers, of course. She's written a lot of articles about her time working with murderers who were found not guilty by reason of insanity. And here's a direct quote from one of those articles. It's about how an inmate, a murderer, asked to take a walk with her while in prison and apparently left her very hot and bothered. Quote, JM and I never did take a walk together. In fact, neither of us ever mentioned the idea again. As far as I know, JM does not speak of me longingly or wax nostalgic about our year of psychotherapy. As for me, I have had some time to reflect on things, and I am plagued by one last question about JM's request to take a walk with me. Why did he ask to take a walk in particular? Why not ask to see a movie or have lunch together? Close quote. Now, it reads like an early 2000s MySpace post or LiveJournal blog from a teenage girl who's infatuated with serial killers, but it's not. It's an excerpt from an article published in the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. And so this is how a lot of doctors in the field of psychiatry conduct themselves. It's the kind of thing they fantasize about. And in Tyree Smith's case, they have taken their ideology to its logical extreme. Now, of course, they don't want Smith to live anywhere near their neighborhoods, right? They're not buying him a house to live next door to them. They just want you to have to deal with it. This is bleeding heart liberalism in its final, horrifically deranged and monstrous, and also, I guess we would say, literal form. Although, as I've pointed out, this isn't actually due to an overabundance of compassion or sensitivity. It's exactly the opposite. These decisions are fueled by a kind of psychotic indifference to the immense human suffering that will inevitably come as a result. The people who made this decision know that there is a high likelihood that this man will butcher another person, and they just don't care. They are just as psychotic as he is. In Russia, they send their cannibals to fight in war to inflict horrors on the enemies of the state. That happened several times in just the past few years during the war in Ukraine. But in the US, psychiatrists want cannibals to inflict those horrors on other Americans. You know, when modern psychiatry was just getting started in 19th century Britain, something called the Alleged Lunatics Friends Society formed. And they saw psychiatrists as completely illegitimate, as totalitarians who just wanted to imprison people without due process. And there was indeed a long period of time where psychiatry was used to imprison people who were not dangerous and had done nothing wrong. You could just accuse them of being insane and throw them in an asylum without any due process. Well, we now have the exact opposite problem. Psychiatry has done a 180 flip. Deranged lunatics are being freed as a means of circumventing the criminal justice system. The common thread here, the thing that ties together these two extremes, is that in both cases, psychiatry is a cover to inflict horrors beyond comprehension onto the public. The reality, and this reality shouldn't need to be said, is that someone who kills another human and eats his brain will never be fit to live freely in society ever again. That should not be a controversial statement. That, in fact, should be the least controversial statement ever uttered. But in psychiatry, it is controversial, which is why people living in Connecticut are worried that they're back on the menu tonight. The truth is that the people who freed the axe murderer cannibal are just as demented as the axe murderer cannibal himself. They haven't consumed human flesh at a graveyard, as far as I know anyway, but they are equally deranged. And because they have a lot more power and are legitimized under the veil of science, they are quite a bit more dangerous. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Going online without ExpressVPN, it's like leaving your kids with the nearest stranger while you go to the restroom. They're probably not a kidnapper or a serial killer, but they could be a liberal, so why would you ever take that risk? They could be all 3 of those things. Here's the scary truth. Every time you connect to public Wi-Fi, whether you're at a cafe, hotel, or airport, your personal data is completely exposed, and it doesn't take some genius hacker to steal it with just some basic equipment. Even a tech-savvy teenager could swipe your passwords, banking details, credit card information. In fact, hackers can make up to $1,000 selling just one person's data on the dark web. That's why I never go online without ExpressVPN. It creates an encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet that's so secure it would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to crack. Plus, it's incredibly easy to use. Just open the app and click one button to protect yourself. I personally use it every time I travel for work events, rallies, and all the rest of it. It gives me peace of mind knowing my sensitive emails and financial information are safe, even on sketchy hotel or airport Wi-Fi. The best part, ExpressVPN works on all your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, you name it. It's rated #1 by CNET and The Verge because it simply works. It's that simple. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/Walsh. That's expressvpn.com/Walsh. You get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/Walsh. Representative Ilhan Omar has some rather unkind words for Americans, otherwise known as the people that she allegedly was elected to represent. Watch this clip here.
These people are just idiots. I really, I'm at the point where it's become really hard to have an intellectual debate with any of these people because the level of stupidity that they are displaying every single day is frankly embarrassing, not just in Congress, but as Americans. And the fact that these people are allowed to say just the most ridiculous things tells you that the dumbing of the United States has arrived, because how else do we get a Trump presidency again?
So Ilhan, who you recall is a United States Congresswoman, just said rather explicitly that Americans display an embarrassing level of stupidity. And she even clarified, just to make sure it was clear with everyone, that she was not just referring to Congress. And if she was just referring to Congress, of course, who would disagree? But no, she was referring to Americans broadly, and she was very explicit about that. And then she even went further and lamented that Americans are allowed to say, quote, ridiculous things. So, just about one of the most un-American things we've ever heard an elected representative say, at least in modern history. I mean, it's hard to think of something that comes to mind. It's the double whammy of Americans are stupid and shouldn't be allowed to say things that I personally think are ridiculous. That's what she just said. So, and by the way, this is among conservatives. This has been cause for criticism, of course, but in corporate media, these comments are getting no play at all. I mean, no one is paying attention to it. There's no pushback, no criticism. So she despises Americans, thinks we're all dumb, and we shouldn't have the right to say the things that she disagrees with. None of this is news, mind you. Of course, we knew she felt this way, but this is probably the most explicit that she's ever been about it. And it's obviously vile and disgusting to hear this from a politician in general, but to hear it from Ilhan Omar in particular is especially grating. I mean, Ilhan has shown that she truly hates this country, and that's not just an empty accusation in her case. She really honestly hates America, and which again, for a politician or anyone in America to hate America is a terrible thing. But it's even worse for her because she comes from Somalia. That's what always gets me about this woman and her attitude towards America. She comes from Somalia, okay? And she's accusing, first of all, I mean, if you really want to play this game, Ilhan, you come from Somalia and you're saying that Americans are stupid. You know what the average IQ in Somalia is? Take a guess. It's 68. The average IQ is 68. And now that estimate comes from a study that was done in the early 2000s, I think. And other studies have tried to debunk it. I don't think any of them have successfully, because it's the kind of thing that, if anyone tries to study this and measure it, you're going to have the mass of mainstream science descending and saying, no, we can't, that's not allowed. That has to be not true. It literally has to be. We can't allow that to be true. So there have been a lot of attempts to debunk this, none of them successfully. But it also, when you hear that Somalia, the average IQ is 68, it tracks. It tracks with what we know about Somalia. If you didn't know anything about Somalia, you never heard of it before, but I just told you that, there's this country called Somalia and the average IQ is 68, you would make a lot of assumptions about what the country must be like. And in Somalia's case, all of those assumptions would turn out to be true. Somalia is one of the most dangerous and violent countries in the world. So one of the poorest countries in the world. The per capita GDP in Somalia is like $600. In the U.S., it's $75,000, just as a comparison. Somalia is not a functioning society. It barely even has paved roads. It is a failed state. And by the way, speaking of the 68 IQ, one of the reasons, undoubtedly, one of the reasons for that IQ is the inbreeding in the country. There's a lot of inbreeding in Somalia, which affects IQ. So there's another cultural highlight for you. So my point is, and this is what, if you come from Somalia and you start talking crap about Americans this way, especially when you're elected to represent us, then you have invited these comparisons. So if I came from Somalia and if I lived here in America, but I was born in Somalia, I would wake up every day and kiss the ground and thank God for America. I would walk around and shake the hand of every American I met and thank them for taking me in. I would be the most patriotic person in the country. I would be obnoxiously patriotic. I would just stroll around all day whistling the national anthem to myself. I would be the corniest, cheesiest patriot you ever met. I would have a giant inflatable Uncle Sam, like a 20-foot tall inflatable Uncle Sam in my front yard. Okay, my HOA would hate me. I would wear nothing but American flag t-shirts every single day. Every day would be July 4th if I came from Somalia and I lived here. Just the sheer gratitude I would have for not being there anymore and being here instead would be overwhelming. Now, I already am very patriotic, but I don't have anything to compare it to, right? I'm grateful to be an American, but I've never been anything else, and I've never lived in Somalia, certainly. The most I can compare it to in personal experience, anyway, is I spent a week in Kenya. And I'll tell you, Kenya was a beautiful country in terms of the natural surroundings and the wildlife and all that. The safari we went on in Kenya is one of the highlights of my life. It was an amazing experience. Most of the people we met were quite friendly. But man, when we got back, I was so glad to be home. I mean, I can only imagine I've actually lived in a place like Somalia, like lived there. And Kenya, I think, is quite a bit preferable to Somalia, but Somalia is just the worst of the worst in so many ways. And yet, so that's her background. And yet she gets here and she just hates this country. She walks around with this snobbish disdain for our country and our people who took her in and gave her this amazing life. And everything about her life in America is vastly better than it would have been had she stayed in Somalia. And she knows that. The ungrateful brat is this woman. I mean, it really is amazing. Let's see here. NBC News has this. Euphoria star Hunter Schaffer, who is one of the most prominent transgender women in Hollywood, revealed Friday that her new passport was issued with a male gender marker. In an 8-minute video she posted on her TikTok story, the actor, who is best known for playing transgender high school student Jules on the hit HBO series, said she had marked herself off as female in her passport application. Then it came back with a male designation. Okay, that's the NBC News article. There's a lot of misgendering going on in that article. Actual misgendering, calling this male she and her. This is a man we're talking about. But the point is that Hunter Schaffer is apparently an actor. I'd never heard of him prior to this, but apparently an actor. And now he's shocked that this policy of listing people according to their actual sex is going into effect. Here's some of his video.
So I'm sure most of us remember on, I think, the first day of Trump's presidency, he signed an executive order to declare only 2 genders recognized by the state, male and female, assigned at birth. So my initial reaction to this, because our president is a lot of talk was like, I'll believe it when I see it. And today I saw it on my new passport mail. And I'm not making this post to fearmonger or to create like drama or receive consolation. I don't need it, but I do think it's worth posting to sort of note the reality of the situation and that it is actually happening. And I was shocked. I also want to say, I don't give a that they put an M on my passport. It doesn't change really anything about me or my transness. However, it does make life a little harder. And thinking about other trans women who this might also be happening to, or other trans people, the list only gets longer as far as the intricacies that come along with the difficulty that this brings into like real life. Trans people are beautiful. We are never going to stop existing. I'm never going to stop being trans.
So that's a man, a 26-year-old man, by the way, whose mannerisms seem to be attempting to approximate a teenage girl. And you notice this with most trans-identified males. We've talked about it many times. They are not identifying as women per se. They're identifying as usually adolescent girls, which should tell you quite a lot. And as for the passport change, obviously the change is correct. He's a male. His passport should say male. The whole point of the passport is that it's supposed to be identification. And the idea, so identify you, like who you actually are. The idea that your legal identification could ever have a blatant falsehood on it is just insane. In particular, in the context of traveling, where in any other scenario for anybody else, they're very strict about these guys. Like what's on the document has to line up with everything else. I can remember several years ago trying to get through security at the airport when the name on my boarding pass was one letter off from the name of my ID. It was a typo, probably my fault when I was buying the ticket. It's like my fat, dumb fingers hit N instead of H in Matthew or something like that. So it said Matt New instead of Matthew. Clearly a typo, but this very slight discrepancy was enough to cause a major problem for me. And so I had to go get it changed and all this. And they just were not, because they're looking at the ID, they're looking at the name. It's like there's a slight discrepancy, something's not matching up. And so they said, you can't go through. You got to go get it taken care of. It was a whole thing. And yet for years now, until this past month, you were allowed to travel and fly even with a major glaring discrepancy between the sex listed on your passport and actual reality. You were allowed to travel under a false identity, in other words, which is obviously crazy. It should have never been allowed. But the thing that jumps out at me the most from this video of whatever his name is, Hunter, right? Hunter. The thing that jumps out the most is just his shock and horror that Trump really followed through on this, that the policy actually went into effect. Because the funny thing is that, trans activists will claim that they're constantly being persecuted and hunted down and harassed and killed and all this nonsense. And yet, when push comes to shove, it's clear that they are so used to being coddled and babied that they just assume that no policy they oppose will ever actually go into effect. Trans-identified people are the most coddled group of humans to have ever lived on Earth. Right? And so in a way, you can't blame him for assuming that this would never happen. Because he's 26 years old, which means that for as long as he has identified as trans, he has lived in a society that has bent over backwards to accommodate his every whim. All of human society reorganized itself around the demands of people like him. They tried to rewrite the rules of biology for his sake. Unsuccessfully, but they tried to. They tried to give him everything, and so now that that's finally changing, people like him are shocked that they never thought it would really happen. And it is, and it should. All right. There were reports last week that the Trump administration is considering possibly taking the tax savings created by DOGE and paying it out in the form of basically a tax refund to every American. $5,000 was the amount that was floated. Representative Jasmine Crockett, one of the other intellectual titans of Congress, we already heard from Ilhan Omar, and now here's Jasmine Crockett responding to this idea last week.
Now, President Trump says he likes the idea of giving some of the savings from DOGE back to Americans as kind of a dividend. Would you support that?
Listen, he's just telling a lie. He's not the one that had anything to do with the $1,200 refunds that people had during the midst of COVID that was done by a Democratic House and Democratic Senate. Right now, what they're going to do is say, hey, we want to give you a refund, but Congress won't let us because they already know that there's just no money for that. The only reason that those refunds came before was because we were living in different times. This was a time in which hopefully we won't ever go through again. We had a once in a lifetime pandemic. The bad part is that I don't know if it's once in a lifetime because we know that Ebola, unfortunately, was detected right here in New York here recently. And if we continue down this road of getting rid of scientists or deciding that we don't want to rely on experts as it relates to what they're telling us to do, or we don't want to deal with vaccines and medicine in this country, then we may be facing not only our next pandemic, but our next 2, 3, or 4 pandemics because of their incompetence. So no, we are not in the business of giving out money. And honestly, I don't know what $5,000 will do for you.
Oh, you aren't? You aren't in the business of giving out money, Jasmine? Really? I mean, that's an amazing statement. A Democrat politician declaring we aren't in the business of giving out money is, I mean, it's like if somebody went up to a prostitute on a street corner to pay for her services and she got all indignant and shouted, hey, I'm not in the business of selling sex for money. No, but isn't that exactly? That's exactly what you're in the business of doing. What are you talking about? Like that, isn't that literally what a prostitute is? And if you're a politician, especially a Democrat politician, you are in the business of giving out money. It's all you do. It's your entire platform. Your entire platform. You give out money to welfare recipients, the entire entitlement industry, the welfare state, foreign governments, hundreds of other special interest groups, and pretty much anyone who you think you can buy, you give money to. You want to give out reparations. Jasmine Crockett, it won't shock you to learn, is a proponent of reparations, giving out money. She also supports student loan forgiveness, but now she doesn't want to give out money. And you know why she doesn't want to give out money? Well, obviously it's because she doesn't want a Republican president to get the credit for it, but also because the money is actually going back to taxpayers, all taxpayers. So it's the fact that it would be equal and shared by all, and that people are getting back their own money, that's why she doesn't support it. It's too fair. That's her problem. It's too fair. Now, I say all this, but just to be clear, I don't think that the Trump administration should be sending $5,000 checks to everybody. The point of saving the money is not to just spend it again in a different form. If I were to support a government handout, then this would be the kind of one that I would support, but I don't because it's actually fair and equal, as fair and equal as something like this can be. But I don't think we should do it. I don't think it's a good idea. Let's actually save money. Let's cut spending. Don't go spend it on something else. And yet Jasmine Crockett's objection is just totally absurd. All right, one other very important story to mention. I don't usually talk about grooming standards in baseball. In fact, I don't talk about baseball at all, especially not grooming standards. But this story caught my eye. Daily Wire reports on Friday, New York Yankees managing general partner Hal Steinbrenner announced the team would no longer force its players to be clean-shaven. Quote, in recent weeks, I've spoken to a large number of former and current Yankees spanning several eras to elicit their perspectives on our long-standing facial hair and grooming policy, and I appreciate their earnest and varied feedback. These most recent conversations are an extension of ongoing internal dialogue that dates back several years, blah, blah, blah. So they are allowing now the Yankees players to have beards as long as they are well-groomed. And that's the news, which I guess among baseball fans has been a point of contention, and there's been some controversy around it. I only bring this up because I think it's part of a growing societal trend, a good growing societal trend for a change, where beards are becoming more acceptable in the workplace and in professional settings, including in professional baseball now, I guess. There have been some proposals that I've read about there, about allowing this in the military more broadly. I mean, they do allow it in certain contexts with certain exemptions and religious exemptions, that sort of thing. But there have been some proposals about allowing it more broadly in the military. And I think we have a while to go before that particular glass ceiling is shattered. But I think that's where things are heading. And all I will say is that, yes, of course, beards should be allowed everywhere on men, just to stipulate, I'm talking about. It is actually, I'll say this, it is ridiculous to not allow beards in really any context. It's also ridiculous to be a man who willingly doesn't have a beard. Like, if you're choosing by your own free will and volition to not have a beard, that's just absurd. I don't know how else to put it. It's like, it's ridiculous. It's mind-boggling. Now, if you have to be clean-shaven for your job, then if your workplace is still stuck in that kind of cursed, effeminate mindset that says beards are verboten, then I'm not going to blame you for that. But if you can have a beard and you just don't, what the hell? What the hell is wrong with you? Here's the crazy thing. Every man looks better with a beard. Every single man. I have never known an exception to this rule. I defy you to find an exception to this rule. Find me one example of a man who looked worse after growing a beard. You cannot do it. You can't. Because the beard improves every man. And for most men, it's not just a minor improvement, it's like a transformation. This is a substantial, life-changing improvement. It's not just that the beard makes you a more handsome guy, it also gives you an air of authority and maturity and dignity, which is why I've never known a man who grew a beard and looked worse. I have known many cases where a guy who had a beard and then shaved immediately looked not just worse, but like horrid. I've known many cases where a guy shaves, I can't even look at him now. I can't even look in your general direction. I want to throw up now because you shaved the beard off. A man goes from looking like a serious masculine person to this like shriveled, leprous little weakling. And why? Why do that? And think of the effort this requires. You have to try. You have to try every day to not have a beard. You are actively trying to look worse. It's crazy. I'll say, and don't take this out of context. Don't take it out of context. But this is the one thing, okay? This is the one thing that the Taliban gets right. Okay, say what you will about the Taliban. Say what you will about them, and there's a lot you can say. I get it. I'm not usually a fan of the Taliban, but they do require men to have beards, and if you shave your beard, you will be punished. Actually, you'll probably be killed. And that's the one policy of that's one of like 3 policies of the Taliban that I think makes sense and should be adopted here, all right? And now, look, I know this is going to end up on social media, and people are going to say, oh, Matt Walsh supports the Taliban. Yeah, I don't, for the most part. I don't support them usually, but on the beard thing, I just think I think that's one thing they got right. Can they, a broken clock is right twice a day and all that. So, I mean, this is their broken clock moment. This is my message to men, which is, and if you hear nothing else I say, if you heed no other call, heed this. Grow a beard. Stop not having a beard. Stop not having one. Stop it. What's wrong with you? You look ridiculous. You look insane not having a beard. Every man without a beard looks actually crazy. I think there's something's going wrong upstairs mentally that this guy doesn't have a beard. So, and I think we can all agree with that. The other Wire Plus members are getting the news today that will be headlines everywhere else tomorrow. Right now, members are inside live chats, debating the news in real time, sharing their opinions, and talking with other fans just like you. Thousands more are streaming exclusive series, culture-shaping documentaries, and hit movies you won't find anywhere else. They're doing it all knowing every dollar they spend is building a platform where their values, voice, and truth can't be silenced. Now's the time to join us as we build the future. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe to join now. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. If I seem a bit angry today, a bit dour and bleak, well, that's just my normal demeanor, obviously. But if I seem even angrier, bleaker, and dourer, which is a word, I think, it's because I'm going through something very difficult in my personal life. And I'm not alone. It's a trauma that the whole country, indeed the whole world, is suffering through. You have no doubt already heard the news that Joy Reid has been canceled by MSNBC. Her primetime MSNBC show, The Reid Out, will be going off air. Now, of course, I have canceled her dozens of times on this very show, but now her own network is canceling her. And now that this is really happening, now that the cancellation is real, I realize that I don't want it anymore. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I'm sorry, Joy. I never wanted it to end this way. You know, you see, Joy Reid's cancellation is devastating for a few reasons. First of all, it's obviously racist. I mean, goes without saying. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms implied as much when the Daily Beast, for some reason, asked for her opinion of this programming change. She said, quote, "I am deeply saddened that Joy Ann Reid, the only African-American woman with her own show on MSNBC, will no longer be seen." And Miss Bottoms is right. Joy Reid deserved to keep her show because she's a black woman. Keith Olbermann was more direct in his response. He didn't just imply that her firing was racist, he outright claimed it.
Firing of Joy Reid by MSNBC, of course it was racist. MSNBC has only ever had 4 women of color solo anchor their own shows, and they've now fired all 4 of them. They've also just fired Alex Wagner. How many protests do you expect to hear from Maddow and O'Donnell and all the rest? It stinks.
Well, Olbermann is right, and he should know about MSNBC's bigotry. He was fired and has not been rehired simply because he is a bulbous, ill-tempered toad. And that is discrimination, too, in its own way. As for Joy Reid, she's a black woman. Sure, she's a deeply unimpressive and profoundly talentless black woman, but why should that matter? Unexceptional, subpar black women deserve to be elevated, promoted, and paid millions of dollars, no matter how lackluster their performance might be. That's basically the whole point of DEI. In truth, this has been a very bad year for women of color who are terrible at their jobs. First Kamala Harris, now Joy Reid. The only mediocre black woman to earn any undue accolades so far in 2025 is Beyonce. And that is simply unacceptable. But there are 2 other far more significant reasons why I mourn the passing of Joy Reid's MSNBC show. For one thing, as somebody in the same industry, in media, I always took great comfort knowing that as long as Joy is on the air, I can never be the dumbest person in media. Now, granted, there are still dozens of people dumber than me, the entire rest of MSNBC's lineup, also CNN's entire lineup, most of the staff of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so on. But Joy Reid was the bulwark. She was the last line of defense. She was the Alamo of stupidity. As long as a major cable network had a primetime nightly show hosted by somebody with the IQ of a crustacean, I knew that I was safe. I would always be a genius in comparison to at least someone in this business. In fact, I could have half of my brain eaten by a parasitic amoeba, and I would still be at least 40 IQ points smarter than Joy Reid. And which maybe does that mean I'm attributing an 80 IQ to myself? Maybe. Still, I'd be smarter. The amoeba would also be smarter. Actually, a lot smarter because of all the brain it just ate. Do amoebas get smarter when they eat brains? Probably not. Do you lose half of your IQ by chopping off half your brain? Is that how it works? Also, probably not. These are very dumb things to say, but still not nearly as dumb as the things Joy said every single day on her show, and that is my point. Finally, Joy provided a special service to right-wing podcasters looking for content. On any slow news day, I always knew that I could just find a clip of Joy saying something humiliating and ridiculous, and I'd be okay. I mean, she was a wellspring of fatuous drivel. She was like one of those geysers at Yellowstone, except instead of spewing boiling hot water or whatever, she just spewed moronic nonsense. And just like those geysers, people would gather around and watch. Actually, nobody watched. That's why she was canceled. But they would watch right-wing podcasters play clips of her show and make fun of them. And now we've lost that. Now, granted, her dumbness was usually pretty boring and uninspired. 90% of her show was just stuff like this.
We begin our final sprint, having arrived at that point in the election season where basically we on this side of the TV screen have said all we can. We've laid out the stakes in this crucial election, where one side stands for freedom while the other meets the textbook definition of fascism, namely a far-right dictatorial regime like Hitler's Germany or Franco's Spain or Mussolini's Italy, but also white-ruled South Africa before Mandela and the black majority took control, or Vladimir Putin's Russia, Viktor Orban's Hungary, or Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela today, that suppresses the rights of women and minorities, uses the military to execute the whims of a strongman dictator, and controls and suppresses the press, education, the arts, rewrites history to suit a favored and dominant racial class, and foments extravagant corruption in order to enrich the dictator and his friends.
Wow, did you hear that? Apparently Trump is like Hitler. What a bold and provocative insight. Joy here is making the profoundly compelling point that Hitler was bad and Trump is also bad, which means that Trump is Hitler. The audience of MSNBC watching her 7 p.m. show that night, all three of them, hadn't heard anything like that since at least the 6 p.m. show or the 5 p.m. or any show during any hour on any day at any point over the past 10 years. So this was not terribly interesting. Though it is extremely dumb, it's far too routine to be entertaining, basically useless for me as content, which is what really matters here. But every once in a while, and often enough to provide a steady stream of content, Joy would reach heights of dumbness so extreme, so incredible as to be awe-inspiring, almost in a way beautiful. Sometimes Joy gave us moments like this.
The only people I ever hear use the word inflation are journalists and economists, right? So that is not part of the normal lexicon of the way people talk. So it's interesting that Republicans are doing something they don't normally do, right? Which is not use the common tongue, right? Not use just common English to sort of do on their campaigns like they're doing with crime. But what they've done is they've taught people the word inflation, right? Yeah. Most people who would have never used that word ever in their lives are using it now because they've been taught it, including on TV, including in newspapers. They've been taught this word, and they sort of wrap this word around whatever it is that they really want to vote, the reasons they really want to.
Now, this is what I'm talking about. It's mesmerizing. It's fascinating. It's grotesque. But you're transfixed as you watch it. You know, I saw a nature show over the weekend where two warthogs were fighting, and it was just ghastly and foul, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And that's what it's like watching Joy Reid try to form an actual thought. Her face contorts as she blurts out the words, hoping they make sense, but they don't. Her brain has atrophied from lack of use, and she's still trying to use it. You know, she claims here that the word inflation is not part of the normal lexicon, that average Americans who used the word during the campaign had just been taught it. They just learned it. They had never used the word inflation before. They had never heard of inflation. Only journalists and economists talked about inflation. So what did people call inflation before Republicans taught them the word in the year 2024? Like, what did they say when they were referring to the higher prices of goods and services? I guess she imagines that the average American was wandering dumbstruck around the supermarket, scratching his head, pointing to the ever-increasing price tags and grunting like a caveman. Me see price go up in sky like bird. Me not have enough dollars. Me not like. Me sad. This is the conversation that Joy Reid imagines must have been occurring at Kroger prior to Republicans teaching everybody about inflation. And a lot of conservatives accuse Joy of being an elitist snob because of these comments, but what they don't understand is that Joy was extrapolating from her own experience. She was the one grunting at the grocery store. She just learned about inflation this past year. She's a grown woman, and in 2024, she's like, what is this inflation thing? What does that mean? Oh, that's inflation? Because she is, again, I must emphasize, very extremely dumb. And that's why she was such a great source of not only content, but also self-confidence to all of us who are smarter than her, which is a group that encompasses nearly every human on the planet above the age of 2 and probably half of the ones below 2. And now Joy is gone, or at least her show is. And we can only hope that she lands on her feet and finds somewhere else to spew her gibberish. The world is depending on her. I am, at least. So don't give up, Joy. My dear, sweet Joy. Keep going. Keep talking. Keep saying stuff on camera. Never stop. Don't listen to anyone who tries to dissuade you. Anyone who tells you to give up the media gig and get a job more befitting a woman of your intellect. Media already is that job, Joy. So don't listen to the haters and the doubters who insult and demean you. I mean, they're right, but don't listen to them because they are the ones who are today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
Today on The Ben Shapiro Show, Joy Reid is ousted at MSNBC, and we pay tribute. Democrats struggle for their next strategy, and Germany swings to the right. That's today on The Ben Shapiro Show. Give it a listen.